In today's saturated and controlled world of music, the right critic can make or break the success of any up-and-coming artist. Welcome to Realest Rhythm. Today we're going to talk about 10 times that artists fought against their destinies and took power back from the critics. Number 10. Radiohead was considered a dud.
Shower special. You're so very special, but I'm a creep.
There's no gray area with Radiohead. You either love them or you hate them. Radiohead gets a lot of heat for being too loved by critics. Even Pitchfork, which seldom gives reviews as high as 8 out of 10, gives Radiohead's albums a 9 or above. Radiohead is known for their mild experimental structure with polyrhythms, asymmetrical time signatures, unconventional use of syncopation, uncommon chord changes, and mid-sun key changes. When you compare this with the rest of rock's 4/4 3-chord style, it stands out as its own genre of music. The Los Angeles Times gave their first album Pablo Honey scores as low as 2.5 stars out of 4. Overall, the album was really poorly received until their lead single Creep gained popularity and gave it life. You know, the song that defines the generation of social media? Their styles are considered mature, human, gloomy, and abstract. Still, when they released their best records OK Computer and Kid A, they continued to receive comments like, "It is the sound of Tom York ramming his head firmly up his own, hearing the rumblings of his intestinal wind and deciding to share it with the world." From Melody Maker, 1.5 out of 5 for Kid A. Dud of the month. I guarantee that it will not occupy the charts for 10 years. Robert Christgau on OK Computer. Number 9. The Battle of NME versus the Stone Roses. NME, or New Musical Express, stems many decades of delivering the latest pop culture, news, and album reviews to all of Britain, and they took an immediate dislike to the Stones in 1989. Jack Barron, their critic, said that the band tries studiously to be blissed out, that they are as inviting as a bathtub of purple jelly left over from the 60s, and gave them a 7 out of 10, which in the US translates to a passing grade of a C-. As our heroes were on their way to flunk their chances at a rock career, it was Ringo Starr who came to their defense and defended their talent. Now, the Stone Roses' self-titled album became the second best album of the year and is number 7 of the best 500 albums of all time. By 2010, NME admits, "We don't get it wrong at NME that often, but this was a clanger." Number 8. Bringing Evanescence to life. Despite being a global hit, Evanescence's debut album Fallen was originally rejected by its critics as belonging to the metal genre, and critics felt particularly strong about it. Pop Matters even called it as dumb and unoriginal as everything else in the genre. While we can't help but appreciate Amy Lee's voice and the rest of the band's take on nu metal, with the frequent use of classical instrumentation and chilling atmospheres, it's a valid point that the guitar riffs didn't bring anything original to the table, while songs like My Immortal and Hello don't even include guitars to begin with. We can definitely see why some critics might have an issue including Evanescence in the same group as Slipknot, Limp Bizkit, and Korn. The closest thing we could find to Slipknot without drums and guitars was from an artist Gamazda who covered their song Unsainted, and while surprisingly good, we wouldn't think to classify it in the nu metal category if we were the critics either. Regardless, today, Fallen is held by Rolling Stone as one of the greatest metal albums of all time, and Billboard calls it a formidable combination of power and melody. Number 7. Daft Punk. Speaking of music that you wouldn't classify as metal, how many of you have heard of Daft Punk's 2001 album Discovery and asked yourself, could this be more annoying? Well, we can relate. However, standing arguably as one of the most fun, flawless, and influential albums of the last 20 years, Discovery was called by The Guardian as a disappointing follow-up, and added, "I loved One More Time, but what the hell was the rest of it about? What was with all the cheesy 80s references? Who encouraged them to put that awful heavy metal guitar on Aerodynamic? Why did all of the vocals have that ridiculous electronic effect on them?" Well, that has to age well. Rhapsody placed Discovery at number 12 of the best albums of the decade, and Rolling Stone calls it one of the 30 greatest EDM albums of all time. Number 6. The Beatles versus Everybody. People were pleased with their new approach and presentation. Filled with new, yes, even they got crushed by the critics. When they released Revolver in 1967, people were pleased with their new approach and presentation, filled with new sounds and ideas from their previous work. People were arguing if they were in fact better or if they were past their peak. That was back when their album was called A Load of Rubbish by musician Ray Davies. If this celebrated songwriter Ray Davies is a reliable critic, then the Beatles made a massive mistake. But the truth is that this was one of their most unique albums that they ever made. Abbey Road was also trash-talked. Nick Cohn of the New York Times said the tracks are nothing special. Rolling Stone lamented the use of its signature synthesizers, saying the sound disembodies and artificializes the music. William Mann of the London Times called the album's best songs minor pleasures in the context of the whole disc. The Beatles went on to bank achievements like no other band has ever obtained, such as getting every member of their band knighted by Queen Elizabeth II, winning a Best Original Song Score Academy Award for Let It Be, becoming the best-selling band in history with over 600 million copies sold, and more. I guess the lesson is to listen to your passions, don't follow the money. Together they led to greatness, and people can't hide greatness. Number 5. The Rolling Stones. Another group that fell into the hands of the critics. In 1972, the Rolling Stones released the album Exile on Main Street. It was harshly criticized and lacked the production, organization, and the purpose that was found on their other albums. It was said that this might have been because of Mick Jagger's problems with drugs and their collective escape to Keith Richards' house in south of France as tax exiles. Lenny Kyle from the Rolling Stone magazine said, "Exile on Main Street spends its 4 sides shading the same song in as many variations as there are Rolling Stone ready-mades to fill them. And if on the one hand they prove the group's eternal constancy and appeal, it's on the other that you can leave the album and still feel vaguely unsatisfied." Today it's called one of the best albums of all time, an album that represented an era and a time. It was even added to the Rolling Stone magazine Top 500 Albums of All Time. Number 4. Led Zeppelin. In 1969, Led Zeppelin came out with their debut album. It was advertised in selected music papers under the slogan, "Led Zeppelin, the only way to fly." It seemed that they were going to explode like a Zeppelin from the poor reviews after its release. John Mendelsohn of the Rolling Stones again said, "In their willingness to waste their considerable talent on unworthy material, the Zeppelin has produced an album which is sadly reminiscent of the Jeff Beck group, Truth. To help fill the void created by the demise of Cream, they will have to find another producer and editor and some material worthy of their collective attention." This review pissed off guitarist Jimmy Page so royally that he refused to speak to Rolling Stone for years, a fact that would cause the magazine much consternation throughout the 70s, as Led Zeppelin bestrode the world like no one before. Still, by 2004, Rolling Stone magazine had no choice but to rank Led Zeppelin the 14th greatest artist of all time. Who would trust them if they didn't include this band on the list?
I stay away to heaven.
Number 3. Black Sabbath was accused of being rip-offs. Lester Bangs of Rolling Stone made history in his career by completely missing the mark on Black Sabbath, Black Sabbath's 1970 self-titled debut. The source of songs like Black Sabbath, NIB, Evil Woman, and The Wizard were dubbed a Cream ripoff by Bangs, who also called it a shuck filled with inane lyrics and discordant jams. With a black marker on its record, Black Sabbath was called a reflection of the worst of the counterculture by Robert Christgau of The Village Voice. Of course, the debut eventually topped the list of the greatest metal records of all time, with Rolling Stone backtracking on its previous review, saying the opening number would define the sound of 1,000 bands. Number 2. Weezer. It would be hard for Weezer to top its 1994 debut studio album, the source of hit singles Buddy Holly, Undone, The Sweater Song, and Say It Ain't So. Somewhat understandably, critics were wary of a possible sophomore slump when 1996 Pinkerton was released. Many didn't give it a chance. Entertainment Weekly trashed the follow-up as a sustained aria of disengagement. Melody Maker recommended listeners ignore the lyrics entirely, and Rob O'Connor of Rolling Stone called it juvenile and aimless, albeit with a bit of optimism. Even a lot of fans couldn't get on board. However, Pinkerton miraculously grew on almost everyone and is now viewed as one of the band's best albums. Case in point, Rolling Stone readers said Pinkerton was the third worst album of 1996 upon its release. Only 6 years later, the same magazine readers voted it the 16th greatest album of all time. Number 1. Elvis. Not even the king has a clean slate. To be fair, in the 50s, there was a bit of controversy surrounding rock and roll music, and Elvis was leading the pack at the time. He was called out by the New York Times, which said, "Elvis has no discernible singing ability. His specialty is rhythm songs, which he renders in an undistinguished whine. His phrasing, if it can be called that, consists of stereotyped variations that go with a beginner's aria in a bathroom. For the ear, he's an unutterable bore." I guess fame starts with knowing your audience. Elvis certainly did. Do you agree with our list? Do you think critics are important in our current culture? Who did we miss? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay updated with new content. Thanks for watching.